welcome to Strange Process. Today we're doing things a little differently. My name is Merriman. I'm an architect here at dpai, and I'm here with Petra Matar, also an architect here, and we are going to be talking about our own individual creative practices and how those relate to our work as architects. So, hey Petra.
Hey Molly.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Yeah, so this is an exciting conversation because we both come from art backgrounds. I don't know about you.
Well,
yeah.
That's interesting because I actually don't come from an art background. I come from a science background, but we can get into that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wow. So did you practice art, any sort of art before architecture?
So I think my introduction to art was probably through music. So I was interested in music from a really young age, listening to music, playing piano. My piano practice was not super creative in that I followed a very classical training, but I felt I was always feeling like I needed to break out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I did in the sense that I explored music, really listening to music a lot, exploring my own interests, and I always felt like I wanted to create music, and eventually I did,
mm-hmm.
and I do now. But that was really my kind of gateway into a creative practice, and the visual art thing came later for me, as did architecture.
Oh wow,
But I know that you were always sketching.
Yes, that was my background. Before I joined architecture school, I decided I should go into architecture because I also like thinking logically,
mm-hmm.
and I love physics and calculus, and then I love drawing. But soon after joining architecture school, I realized everything I've done before architecture school kind of did not apply in the sense of the process of sketching and especially the kind of art that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Architecture school was definitely completely different, and then architecture is completely different in terms of how the process works because it requires planning, which is...
Right. But there is planning in other things as well. I mean, and this kind of raises an interesting point in terms
mm-hmm.
of like your sketching. Like you are, in a sense, it's like you are making a series of kind of micro decisions as you're working,
exactly.
right? So is that planning or is that improvisation, would you say? It's
very different from architecture in the sense that in architecture you sort of plan ahead of time. There's more reasons as to what you do. They're more concrete reasons, they're easier to explain. Yeah. Whereas with art, it's like, oh, like I will scribble lines, and why did I put that there? I just felt like it. But I'm not gonna, put a wall in a building because I just felt like it. It's because it has to be there for a reason.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because we were talking about last night we were talking about intuition and the importance of intuition in architecture. Mm-hmm. So when you're sketching a line, it's very intuitive. It's almost like it's an extension of your body, and it's kind of sometimes almost involuntary. Mm-hmm. Like your muscles move a certain way. We don't really know why, but it happens and it feels really good.
Absolutely.
But in architecture, because we're so bound by different rules, by building codes, by having to coordinate with structural and mechanical and the client, what the clients need, what the end users need, there's all these rules kind of coming down on us that can sometimes make us feel a little bit trapped. But we were talking about the importance of intuition
Absolutely.
and kind of joy in creating,
mm-hmm.
Making creative decisions. So how, I find this an ongoing challenge. Like when I'm designing something, it's really important to be able to feel that kind of spark of spontaneity, of creation, when even if you're thinking of an image of a building, or even deciding where rooms are going to go, or where walls or windows are going to go. But how do you kind of encounter that intuition?
It's almost like I imagine myself in the space. That's how I would, you draw the plan. You sort of know how much area you have to work with. You look at the outside of the building, but it's almost like just putting yourself in it and just getting a feel for it. Like even something as small as in the office, when we had the kitchen wall was white. Mm-hmm. I could not let that go because it was. I knew it was gonna feel more grounded.
It just felt wrong.
It just felt wrong for it to not be black.
Yeah.
Because I knew it was sort of just gonna add this balance, and I think that's where probably my intuition comes in. And in terms of circulation, you know, just it is logical, but also, you know, just like imagining, I like to imagine myself inside the space where to compress things and where to open things up. The one thing that I wish we had more in architecture, which we lost in modern architecture, is craft, because that's where a lot of the intuition came in.
Right, so actually interacting with material.
With material and just having that element of, craft in it.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, I often yearn for being more hands-on in what we do, because we're so often clicking a mouse or, you know, just thinking about something in a very kind of remote way. You know, we get to go to site and see things happening, but we're not the ones actually, you know, laying the bricks, working with our hands. And I know for me, this is part of what drives my own creative practice, is the need to interact with materials.
So what did you do about it?
So, well, a lot of different things, but one thing that I've recently fallen in love with is ceramics. So is working with clay, because it's like such an incredibly direct material experience, and it's like the clay and gravity and centripetal force is all working together, and sometimes it feels like it's really governing you, and if you try to do something, like if you're like willing it to do something, it will do the opposite of what you're trying to get it to do. So it's like you almost have to surrender to the material, which is so refreshing when, you know, we're in this position where we're trying to control everything from this remote position. But when you're at a potter's wheel, it's like the clay is like your boss, basically. Yeah,
and that's like the liberating thing too, right? Where you don't have to be in control. I think that's what's liberating about, you know, just making art. It's just the stakes are so low and mistakes are so happy. And also do some watercolor, which is the same animal, I feel, as ceramics, where it's like if you try to control it, it's just not going to work.
For sure, there is an element of like you're letting the elements, you're letting the materials dictate, and the forces, like you know, gravity, and you know, you tip the page and the water moves a certain way, and depending on the paper might absorb or might not absorb, and you don't know what's going to happen
too wet
until you just throw the water and the paint on the page, and then
you react to it.
Yeah, and then exactly. So it's like an action and reaction kind of scenario, which I also see a lot in your work, like in your visual art. There's an element of like just precision, but then there's also this like amazing, like in all your little kind of marks, like you'll have, for example, like in your figurative drawings, you have a figure, which feels like it's coming from an image that you had. I don't know, because I can't draw people at all, so it's like magical to me how you do this, but you have this amazing detailed lifelike figure, and then it looks like you are reacting. It's like a chain reaction after that of, like there's like little kind of marks over here, little dots, little scribbles, and then, you know, different colors, different strokes, and
it's for me, it really always like comes from, and for some reason I'm ever since I was a child, I'm obsessed with the human form. And especially faces, like it's just what I'm drawn to create for whatever reason. And everything I draw will always like come from that point. But you know, when I started, it was pencils, right? You could erase pencils, and then at some point I was just embracing just drawing with pens, and it was like, okay, well, when you draw with a pen, you're gonna make a mistake, and then how do I deal with that? And I would like try to conceal it with like little frilly things, and then eventually the frilly things became sort of an aesthetic that I liked. So from the mistake and trying to cover up the mistake came sort of a language that I embraced, and then now it's like, oh no, I'm gonna actually use that language to create imagery. I don't know what the face is gonna look like, but when I start drawing it, it's almost like I just kind of always like know.
Where do you start usually?
With drawing a face? I will just do the brow ridge, and then the nose, and then the eyes.
So if a face were a building, what part would the brow be?
That's an interesting question. It's always the constraints of the building. It's that's usually where.
Would it be the site? Would it be?
Yeah, it's usually the like where can the building sit?
Mm-hmm.
Usually, yeah, because of topography, because of setbacks, because of program.
Mm-hmm.
What is the area to work with? Because in a way, the brow ridge will like set where that face is going to go on the paper.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on like what the type of like what kind of paper you're working with. Where are you starting on the page? How does it relate to this corner and that corner and this corner?
Yeah, and then everything has to kind of follow that.
Yeah.
That brow ridge. What is your brow ridge in pottery?
Well, it's always kind of the same when you're working on the wheel. I mean, you're really just trying to center. You're trying to center the clay.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. If you don't have the clay perfectly centered, then everything will just go completely awry. And sometimes it can feel centered, but you might be in a rush and you're like, oh yeah, no, it's centered. I'm just deciding it's centered, so I'm gonna go. And then you realize very soon after trying to raise up the side of the vessel that things are moving more than you would like them to, which can sometimes which can be interesting and can be fun. And I love throwing on the wheel because every single time you're learning something different. You're kind of internalizing this relationship with the clay and the speed of the wheel and knowing which movements do what, and whether to go slowly, whether to go quickly. At what point you're about to lose control and the pot is just going to collapse on itself. And when that happens, it can be frustrating, but it's also a victory in a way because you're like, okay, I just tested this. Like I understand the limits now of this material.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like a stress test. Like trying to figure out at what point a concrete beam can no longer withstand more weight. It's like we have to know these things.
Yeah.
It's really important that we understand them. I see it as that. And then it's like, well, what do you do now with this lump of wet clay? So there are a lot of different ways of dealing with that aftermath. You can cut it down. You can reform it into a ball and start over. It's just a series of more prompts that you react to. So.
And what is like besides it kind of completely failing? Do you know what you're gonna make when you start?
Never.
Okay.
No, never. I mean, it does depend on the size of clay that you're starting with. So you cut the clay off of the block and you kind of get all the work all of the air out of it, and you have a certain size that you're working with, and you're limited to that size. But other than that, the shape can be anything. It could be a flat plate, it can be a cylinder, you can create a bowl, and that's just working on the wheel. So when you're doing hand built, it's pretty much limitless what you can do. I haven't explored that all that much yet, but again, it's like I like things that I know can be like a lifelong pursuit. I see architecture as a lifelong pursuit because there's just so much to know that, and I feel the same with clay, even though it's so simple, it's just one material, but it's like endless possibilities, which is just, I love it.
It's funny because like we talked about that yesterday as well, because we had a conversation about sort of what we're gonna be talking about today. And then we were talking about retirement. So when you talk about lifelong pursuits, it's like, will you be doing pottery when you retire, or will you be doing architecture? Will you be doing both?
Hopefully both. Yeah, I somehow throughout my career, the two are going to come together and morph. This is something I think about a lot too. Is like how can I tie my ceramics practice into architecture? And there's so many. I mean, there's like a lot of amazing ways that people have already done this. By creating interior finishes like tile, but then also I think about how can clay. I mean, and clay is a building material. What are the different ways that you can think about clay as like a structural material, as a finish, as an accessory like wall hooks, or
right.
They're just such a beautiful it's like a match made in heaven, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And how do you feel like clay making and ceramic making has influenced the way you practice architecture, or has it yet?
I think it has, like, indirectly, in the sense that it gives me kind of that, it gives me that feeling of freedom that I don't necessarily have working in architecture. And so it gives me the outlet that then lets me be more kind of present when I am working in architecture. That's one of the things.
Right.
I don't know, what about you?
It's similar, yeah. It does kind of ground me, because then I have an outlet to kind of go crazy and make mistakes, and it's beyond architecture. I think it's important in my life to be able to have this one outlet where I can just do anything, and the stakes are low, because it will allow me to focus in other areas of my life.
Yeah.
Because I just kind of compartmentalize the chaos.
Yeah.
But in architecture, I mean, hopefully in the future, you know, I would like to design, given, like, you know, friendly budgets and and timelines, and I don't know, there's like this pipe dream of mine to always practice architecture, but to sort of make it a little bit, you know, like more artistic, like just to add things that we typically don't add in architecture because they don't serve a function. You know, maybe like make a building that's shaped like a big head, you know?
Yeah.
That would be...
Start with that brow.
Start with that brow, and yeah, so that's
Cool.
that's hopefully where it will end up.
Well, it's exciting. I'm excited to see what the future brings, Petra.
Yeah, and hopefully with the both of us, you know,
Yeah,
giant ceramic head building.
Yes. Well, thank you. This has been really fun.
Yeah, this is a great
And
conversation.
Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that you tune into the next episode of Strange Process.